I know that there's still people that are struggling to get in. Firstly, it's great to see some faces that I recognise and guys that have been to us before, but just to introduce myself to those guys that are new to some of this stuff. My name's Aidan McNulty. I'm the Academy coach here, but also Coach Development Officer with the Academy. My role is to support you guys in your environments, and this is a great opportunity to give you some education and some information around some of the coaching practice. The reason I've asked Ed Hall in, who's going to be talking to you guys around some coaching strategies, is because he is my coach. We have responsibility as coaches to get better, that's why you're here. And certainly from our perspective, when I'm dealing with our players in the academy, I need to make sure that I'm doing the best I can to support them, and the only way for me to do my best is to have a coach and to be assessed and given feedback to, and we'll go into that in a second. What I would like you to do first, because I think, and a part of, I think this is an actual coaching strategy, is that there needs to be purpose when learning is about to take place. There needs to be something that you go into a session thinking about and have a purpose to what you're going to get out of it. So what I would like you to do is just in twos or threes with the people around you, is have a discussion for just 1 minute around what you want to get out of this, what you want to get out of today, so that there's clear purpose, that when you go onto the field or you're listening to the stuff Ed's going to talk about, or we come in to reflect, what is it that you want to get out of the 2 hours that we're here? Just 30 seconds.
I'll write it up from there.
Well, because
then we can reflect a bit more accurately then, because I can adapt stuff as well to fit with what they want. Yeah, that's cool.
Okay. Alright, does anyone want to share theirs?
Yeah, for me it's just how can we create an environment that maximises the amount of learning that the players can take from a short period of time.
Okay, cool. So some environment stuff. Yep.
What are the
Sorry, say that again.
What are the
yes. What is it? Yeah, okay, cool.
Maximise the learning in the session. We only get an hour a week, so making sure you're using that time effectively. So how to the best strategy.
That's cool. Anyone else? Yep.
See what good looks like in your eyes, and then see if we can replicate that in our areas.
So some context stuff. Yeah. Anything else?
I've said I have no idea what to expect out of the night, but I'd like to take something that means I behave differently next time.
So some coaching behaviours.
Yeah.
Oh man, that's a good one.
Some strategies that I can work with the coaches that I work with, because we have a number of coaches. So I can give some directions to them.
So co-coaching. We can touch on that, definitely, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Refining, as in the overall coaches, you know,
So just getting better. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Develop player engagement.
Some engagement stuff. Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that.
How would you find the cross-sport awareness?
Oh, this is cool. This is going to be really fun. Yeah. You've got to, at the end of this, you've definitely got to feed back to us on what's different in football and what's potentially better, and maybe what you can add from a football perspective to our rugby world, and vice versa. That's
That's why I was sitting over there.
yeah. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Ed now. Like I said, he's my coach. I go to him when I need some of this stuff. I need to maybe question what good is looking like. Certainly for co-coaching. So me and Jimmy, my head coach, we would ask Ed around what we could have done better as a two, coaching a group to get the best out of the players, to get the best out of our time with them. We only get maybe an hour a week as well. So yeah, I'll hand you over, and then what we'll do is we'll go outside. We'll do some coaching stuff. So for those of you that can take part, we'll do some rugby stuff. You will be with your player hats on and your coaching hats on and some observation hats on. And we'll just give each other some feedback. We'll have discussions around what was good, what can we get better as coaches. And maybe you might have to coach some rugby. That's pretty crazy. Yeah, could be fun though. Ed.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm a senior lecturer in sports coaching at Northumbria University. It's my day job, if you like, and then I spend most of the rest of my life here with Aidan and Jimmy. Like I say, working with them. I wouldn't say I necessarily coach Aidan. I think we just work together to do stuff better, and I learn as much from him as, if anything, he learns from me. And hopefully that's what will happen tonight. So I think already, I reckon there's some stuff that I'll learn from hearing from you, and I would challenge you to tell me what we do and don't achieve, which will tell me that I need to change what I do the next time. So there's some maybe behaviour change stuff in there. That would be a form of collaboration, which would be one of my core values if you ask me about my coaching philosophy. And fundamentally, I think that's built upon being critical, and we'll explore what I think that means a little bit and how that might be useful in the context of your individual circumstances. So it's nice to see some people that I've taught before and some people that I've coached with before. And what Rob would tell you is that over the 15 years that I've coached rugby for, I've made lots and lots of mistakes, a lot of them. And in fairness to Rob, and I would praise him for this now, perhaps not at the time, he challenged me on a lot of that stuff. And now I really value that, and I wish I'd known what I know now about good coaching in order to take more advantage of that at the time. At the same time as being a coach and doing stuff as a coach, I spent the same 15 years learning about coaching in a university context. So I've done foundation, undergraduate, masters, and then a doctorate in sports coaching and various components of sports science and stuff as well. So the stuff that's in here is built predominantly on, or the context is my research, my findings, particularly from my PhD, which was in International Rugby Union. And then I've drawn upon a range of different findings in order to present some evidence that challenges and gives you some critical considerations, things to think about that maybe you hadn't thought about before. So we'll see where we get to. From you then, as coaches, what are the uncontrollables? So what are the things that make your job as coaches hard that we can't really control? So the weather, I would say, is one. The ref is quite hard to influence, depends who they are, but any other thoughts? What stuff gets in the way? What makes it challenging? Numbers, yeah. Absolutely. So mood state we might talk about, and that would be affected by a range of different factors. Numbers would be injury, yeah.
Facilities and equipment.
The resources that we've got access to, yeah, absolutely. So the space we've got to work in, which we've coned off a space outside, but that's it.
Certain individuals.
In what way?
So you could have some certain individuals that may change the environment or the culture which you're trying to, which challenges yourself and challenges the rest of the group.
Yeah, the makeup of the people that we're working with, which we might call our associates. Yeah.
Variation in the speeds of learning the group you're dealing with.
Yeah, I might just call that ability, so just where they're at and where they can get to, and the factors that affect how they get between those two places. Good one, yeah, parents. Yeah. I'd imagine that most of these things could be seen as opportunities as well as challenges, but but I can see exactly where you're coming from with that one, yeah. Anything else? People turning up on time yet? We'll not mention those that came in late, but yeah. Quite a lot of stuff. I mean, we could go on and on and on. And if you come and watch one of my lectures at university, I usually do. The reality is, what we're talking about is that coaching is really complex. It's not complicated, but it's complex. And the reason that we're going to talk about coaching practice is because fundamentally it's one of the few things that we have some kind of control over. Not total control, as we'll probably find out, but it's something that we can influence, and we'll explore how in a moment. So we're going to talk about coaching practice because it sits at the heart of the coaching process. So this is the model of coaching that I developed as part of my PhD, and what it acknowledges is that what we do is shaped by us, by our knowledge and our philosophy, by the roles that we think we've got to perform. It's also shaped by the people that we work with in the coaching context, our athletes, whether that's football, rugby, it doesn't matter, but the people that we coach. But also our assistant coaches, the parents, the referees, the opposition, you name it, the people we interact with, their needs, their expectations and the roles that they perform shape our practice as well. So parents is a great example of that. You can, yeah. Yeah, I've got a feedback form at the end, standard CPD type stuff. If you leave me your email address, I'll email you out a copy of this. And I'll explain why that might be useful a bit more towards the end as well. And in addition to the associates we interact with, there's a whole lot of context that surrounds that includes cultural factors. So if we were talking about this stuff in Russia or China or Canada, the context in which we were in would shape our expectations and what we think good coaching looks like, for example. The resources that we had available to us, we've highlighted those things, and a whole load of extraneous factors like the weather that we just have absolutely no control over. And the reality of good coaching practice in the middle of that is the stuff that adapts to all of this to most closely meet the needs and expectations of the people that we're working with. That's how the research would explain it. So coaching practice sits at the heart of that stuff. And given that we can't really control a lot of that, if through events like this, we can shape and develop your knowledge, our knowledge, of practice, then the stuff that we actually do, our behaviours and actions out on the pitch, the activities that we run, will be better. So that's the rationale for why we're looking at the things that we're looking at tonight. Given that practice sits at the heart of everything that we do, and by practice I just mean the things we do, our behaviours, our actions, when you're planning and thinking about your coaching practice, or when you're reflecting about it afterwards, what proportion of time do you spend putting X's and O's on a page and drawing out cones and thinking about bibs and timings? And how much time do you spend thinking about where you stand, who you look at, what questions you're going to ask? Any thoughts? Well, I mean, what most people would suggest from the literature, from the evidence, that planning and reflection is a big challenge for coaches because we're all really busy people and most of it happens in the car on the way or on the way back from. So what proportion of our time would you say you spend thinking about what you have done and why, as opposed to what's gone on amongst the players and the action?
Well, the same time as I said, it's an hour, half an hour before planning, half an hour.
And what proportion of that would be about you and your behaviour versus what the players have done or what the activities happen?
Try and go for an even split, but you tend to focus on it. Yeah,
Okay, interesting. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong, I'm just interested in why people...
10% for yourself.
10%?
But I think we're missing an awful lot of that coaching because it can be quite challenging to give people feedback on something that's given up their time.
Yeah.
If you decided to throw a wobbly and leg it, then you might be on your own anyway. So I think that's almost forgotten, which is probably key in getting 360 feedback on performance as well as the guys on their results.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a bit basic as well. There's no like giving feedback to the coaches. It's about taking about how to organise everyone. So what role am I playing? What role is that guy playing? What role is that guy playing?
Yeah.
Whereas often in terms of one of them to just take charge of the session, but having all everyone.
Yeah, are the floodlights on? Has somebody turned the hot water on for the changing rooms? Did somebody wash the kit? Where are the bibs? The balls are all flat. Where's the put? We just get on with the business of coaching and why we're doing what we're doing and the specificity of how we're going to do it, the nuts and bolts, the real nitty-gritty stuff we tend to not think about because we're just doing. And that's why I really want to mine into this stuff and to think about it. So there's a caveat to all of this, and I'm glad none of you said that in terms of the board, because you're definitely not going to get this, but there is no silver bullet. There is no recipe, there is no magic formula, and if there was, I would be on a Hawaiian island right now. Anybody who says this is the answer to good coaching practice is trying to sell you something. There is no magic answer. And the caveat to that caveat is that neither does that mean any practice is good practice. So there's no perfect practice, but there are degrees of less good practice. And a critical consideration of practice means that we understand the distinctions and differences between those things, so that we are more in control, more self-aware of when we're doing things that are up here and when we're maybe doing things that are a bit further down here. And not just for ourselves, but in that co-coaching capacity that you talked about, we're able to maybe support other people to understand their practice better as well. And I think if we can know why we're doing what we're doing, we're in a much better place to be doing that stuff better. What I think that I can do is to help raise your awareness, and I think the things that we're going to talk about will maybe draw attention to stuff that you hadn't thought about, weren't aware of before, some things that you can take away and have a go at. Again, they're not right answers, they're just things that we have some good evidence for. And evidence is as flawed as most stuff, because we haven't got loads of it. It's very expensive to generate, very timely to develop. So this is just our best version of what we can say for sure at the moment. Gravity is not the reason stuff falls down. It's just our best explanation for it, as the evidence supports that understanding at this very moment. If somebody comes up with a different theory tomorrow that's better supported by the evidence, gravity goes right out the window. So this stuff is just the best evidence that we have at the moment, and I've tried to pull it together around a series of different themes. What I would also like to get out of tonight personally, because it is going to be a lot of me talking at you and then we'll go outside and hopefully you'll have some more stuff to say back to me, but do keep pitching in, is that you feel that you can get in touch and say, oh, I'm experiencing this in my practice, Ed, what do you think about that? Drop me a line, send me an email, come down and watch what's going on here. Just be more in a relationship that's aimed at getting better as coaches, and I think I'm really pleased to see some of the points you've made about what you want to get out of tonight are aimed at that and are pointing in that direction anyway. So, practice, behaviour, that's the focus of tonight. Could you introduce yourself to somebody that you don't know, and when you're talking to them, I'd like you to identify the top 3 behaviours that you think you use in a session. So the top 3 things, the key 3 behaviours you think you use most often. So is it praise, feedback, questioning? What is it? Okay, so introduce yourself to somebody new, and then what do you think your 3 things are? Okay. Grab a seat. What do we think then? Key behaviours?
Me, I try to ask as many lots of questions. Try to create an environment where they're self-aware and self-critical.
Cool. Yeah.
Come up with.
So questioning. Who else would say that questioning's in the top 3? Different behaviour from somebody? Yeah. Anyone else have instruction in the top 3?
Didn't, but I probably should have.
Okay.
As in instructions for games.
Observing. Oh, you know all the answers though. Anybody think that's pretty high up in there? 2, 3, 4. Anything else?
Flexibility.
Oh, that's interesting. That behaviour?
Yeah, being able to, if something doesn't go as also expected, but actually that's because the guys worked it out, then instead of like rewinding them, try and bring onto the same track, see if you can work out something different for what you can try and achieve from that session.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most important coaching skills. I would question whether it's a behaviour, but I think it can be demonstrated through a range of different behaviours. But that's interesting.
Have fun or enjoyment.
Yeah, I would call that an outcome created by the behaviours that we use. Feedback. Positive.
Not necessarily.
How many people use any kind of feedback? Would be in their top 3. There's quite a few in there. Yeah, I would say that could probably go into lots of them. So that's a mannerism or a characteristic of the way that we might give feedback enthusiastically or ask questions enthusiastically, or I could ask them in a negative way. That's interesting. So we can measure that stuff. Part of the research that I did with the head of the Scotland women's team was we measured her behaviours across a season. 25,000 behaviours. And we got a really clear picture of what her practice looks like. But in the context of this situation, this is what Jimmy Ponton, who is current professional academy coach and soon to be England under-20s coach, that's what his behaviour is. So this is from 4 sessions, video recorded and coded. It's about 5,000 behaviours on that screen. Silence, management, questioning, corrective feedback, instruction, hustle, so encouragement of effort, some indirect management, so moving people around, talking to their assistants, conferring with associates, general positive feedback, responding to players' questions. It's an interesting one. Praise, specific feedback that's positive, and he's quite funny. Humour. So I would be interested in this, but I'm interested in what your thoughts are. What are you surprised by on there? Okay. So that's fantastic. That's the best bit of information we've had tonight, because you've reminded me about something I forgot to say. It's good feedback. Well done. I'm glad the clue was there. I'm glad that was there. So in this presentation, I've hidden some knowledge. So it's in there, but I'm not going to say it explicitly. How many of you know about the CARDS framework? The majority. So there are implicit references to CARDS. I reckon, I don't know how accurate it'll be. I would challenge you to count how many times you think I make reference to cards. I think so far I've done it 4 times, just because I didn't mention it at the beginning. At the end of the presentation, I'd be interested, maybe stick a hand up when you think that I've made reference to it. So yeah, I think there's some direct links between this and cards, and we'll highlight some of that stuff in there, and what we talk about next.
I like his box about the response to the players' questions.
Yeah, this one down here.
That shows that obviously he's encouraging an environment where they can ask questions and challenge what's been said or what's happening.
Yeah.
And he can provide them with the specific feedback they want rather than feedback that he thinks they need.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Any caveats to that? Any flip sides? Any challenges or issues that might come with that?
Too many questions.
Yeah. So the Scotland coach talked about women white noise mode. She's female, so I accepted the sexist nature of her remarks. She talked about the fact that because they had an open environment and because she encouraged that questioning, that actually there was a lot of it, and sometimes it was because they just quite like a rest. So critical consideration. So all of this stuff is good and bad depending upon how it's used and why it's used. This is not a paint by numbers method of coaching. Do not copy this. This works because Jimmy's an outstanding coach and because he's made this work for the context and the athletes that he works in. So that is not the recipe. That was with the under-16s.
I think as well it's whether you take a facilitative outlook to your coaching or teaching. I was at a recent one where there was England and Scotland under-17s coaching, training together, and there was 2 completely different methods.
I think we were probably at 7-1. Yeah.
So pictures would look massively different from Russell Earnshaw, John Fletcher to the
Scotland
Yeah.
coach, and it was the only person you heard in the Scotland side was the coach. 99%.
Yeah, just to come back to the point about the environment stuff around the kids asking questions. We would say to the players, beat the game. I might have mentioned that a couple of times, or when you come to our environment, you would hear us say that. So we would challenge players to disrupt the game, agitate the game, beat the game, find ways to win, find ways to get stuff done. And through us being quite explicit around beat the game, they then would come and ask us questions around opportunities. So they would come up and go, you didn't mention about forward passes in your explanations. Can you pass it forward? So they would want to beat the game. They would want to test the laws. They would want to test us as coaches. And a lot of their questions, and I think that's fair, would be around beating the game stuff. Can we do this? Are we allowed to do this?
Rusty's feedback when the England under-18s coaches came up to coach the 16s here was, of all the academies, the players here ask the most questions of the coach. And that's interesting, I would say.
It's definitely an environment. It's what you create.
Any other thoughts about that?
What's the little G? It's not going off the difficult.
I'd lost the note.
Can't really remember now. We've taken some of the smaller stuff out. Remind me and I'll email you and let you know.
Would you say that obviously at that level, silence, you can have more silence because you don't have to put so much direct instruction in because of the level of the player? So I would talk a lot more than that, but because I would want them to know what they're doing is good. So like I might give them feedback like that's great, that's good, go forward. So they understand that what they're doing is good. But you would expect a higher level player to know what they're doing. So
that picture's definitely looks
Yeah.
different for you.
Yeah.
That's that.
yeah.
And this picture looks very different when Jimmy coaches the under-18s and when he coaches the first team.
What's different about it?
With the first team in particular, that's bigger.
Why?
Well, you'll have to ask Jimmy about
They
that.
want it. Good, really good question.
Yeah.
They want it.
Very good question.
So they want to
If they
get
didn't
better.
get it, they think that Jimmy was a weak coach.
Right.
Yeah,
So
so
they're
there's...
asking what they need to do to be better.
And they get
But
paid.
your players at 16s don't know that.
They want to be told to, as opposed to stepping back and Jimmy just pulling. They just, if they didn't hear something from the coach, they'd be like, well, Gerald, what are we doing?
Is that because they've been brought up previous 10, 15, like in a different
They've
environment?
never been the kids of the generation, a lot of you guys who probably work with, where we let them explore.
I would suggest that if Jimmy did this with a lot of the first team players, they would be extremely challenged by that.
Really, even?
Yes.
I think as well, it's when you're playing at that level, you're talking more systems, you're playing systems, because every point you lose is financially.
Yeah, they're trying to control variables that control as much as is controllable about the game. There's different ways to win rugby, but there is a different profile. Each individual session that made up that profile looked different. So Jimmy does not have a coaching style, because there is no such thing as a coaching style. You all coach differently every time you coach, because the people that you coach.
Coaching surely to the group that you like to coach.
Yeah.
So, for example, I coach with the 13s, the RFU, the Road and the Northern Divisional team. So you adapt your coaching style to that group that you play.
Yeah, and people just coach differently implicitly without being aware of it.
So do you think if you were to do that same statistic, starting with the 16 in 2 years' time, and a lot of them 16 to 18, would you expect that to change much because they're waiting for that environment that 16 would be, or is it more implicit to that sort of age?
To be honest, I don't think the data tells us that. It just tells us that it's different. Why it's different is the next step that we would probably go to. And there's a lot of knowing why it's different is not really the answer. So I gave the analogy, I did a debunking coaching myths lecture to my students the other day. And has everybody heard about learning styles? Okay, so there's learning styles don't exist. There is no evidence at all that supports the notion of learning styles. The idea that we would measure your preferences for learning and then learn you in that way is the same idea as me asking my 4-year-old son, what do you want for tea? And then just giving him whatever he says. What you want and what is best for you in the context of learning might be entirely different things. So what that picture looks like and how closely aligned that is, if you remember back to the model that was up, to their expectations, and then next to that, their actual needs, those pictures might even be different as well. So there's a whole lot of complexity here that we're trying to wade through in getting to some understanding of what does good look like, who's defining that good, and B, when you're directing that at 50 players out on the pitch, good doesn't look the same to all of them. It doesn't feel the same emotionally to all of them either. So when we project those behaviours, everybody interprets them slightly differently. So there's an even bigger challenge there. And one of my PhD students currently, his job is trying to unpack and unravel that in cricket. So he's looking at, when a coach does this behaviour, what do you and you experience? Because at the moment, the level of sophistication of the research is the coach does stuff, and we can measure what that stuff is. Who knows what people actually think about it? Okay, what we're going to do is focus on some of those main behaviours and why those behaviours might be useful for you to think more and more about. So silent observation was Jimmy's major behaviour, and this is consistent across all the research that's been published in rugby so far. And all the research that's been published in rugby so far is my one paper. Okay? So the paper that we did on the Scotland coach, their profile had silence as their biggest behaviour. And we looked at that across games and training. Some of the core functions of silence are connected to noticing, but we have to also acknowledge that silence can be off task. So there's a plane, we're right next to the airport, we can be looking at stuff that's not relevant. So we can distinguish between silence and observation that's useful versus silence and observation that's useless. But predominantly, the value of silence is for you as coaches to notice stuff. And this is about detailed, conscious attention to inform your future action. When we are planning our sessions, do we plan where to stand? Because where we stand affects what we see, and what we see affects what we then do. Who's the most powerful person in the coaching context? Is it the coach? Because the coach only does stuff when the players do stuff. So if I see you do something good, it's the thing that you've done that's good that is the trigger for me to give you praise. So you are pretty powerful as athletes if you were the athlete in that context. So how are we deciding where to stand in order to structure what we see? Have we planned what to look for? Are we just focusing on the technical and the tactical? Or are we looking for who spoke to who? Why did they speak like that? What does their body language tell us about their emotional state or their well-being? Somebody mentioned mood at the beginning when we talked about variables. How are we adapting our practice in response to noticing these things about the session? So,
Can I ask you a question?
yeah, go on.
How many of you coach in teams? So you have a co-coach, and how often would you stand together? Often? Not often? We've got to shake your head. No? So what would you do?
I quite often walk around off through the pitch.
Okay, cool.
Whereas the person I coach with quite often stands still.
Yeah.
It's because Jack's got a really good degree and
Yeah.
he knows what to do.
So you stand together. So what does that forge you?
Translation first.
Yeah.
Converse, give each other information. Yeah. And that we've already said that's a good coaching behaviour, which Jimmy has. However, you're seeing the same picture.
That's why you walk about and you cross over. That's when you
Potentially, yeah. So there's sort of crossover. So
It's coming
something
together
that,
at various points within the session.
yeah. So something that Ed has coached myself and Jimmy is we have got to be conscious of where we stand, so that we can then come back together and assess what we notice, and then think of what our decisions are going to be in terms of feedback, which will obviously come next. However, if we're constantly standing together and then discussing constantly, we're definitely just going to talk about the same stuff and we're going to see the same stuff. So, are we getting a fair reflection of what the game's like? Are we able to feedback in the best possible way for the players? Just something to think about. Sorry if
No, that's absolutely fine. I mean, you've ruined the timings, but
On the flip side though as well, if you never come together, you're going to come with different opinions.
Yeah.
What the same thing you see.
Correct. You have to come together. That's something.
And you feedback should be constant throughout the session, so you're apart. One coach can give you feedback, whereas in still on.
well, one of my PhD supervisors was a psychologist, and although her work was developed in sport and tells us that we know that experts see information differently, experts in any context, where it was really interesting in the way that it was applied was in crime scene investigation. So here's a crime scene. Here are two crime scene investigators. Let's strap a set of goggles on them that measure where your eyeballs look and send you in. And the experts look at different stuff first. So they are really good at noticing. So you want to be a really good coach, you've got to be really good at noticing. And this is a significant difference that I anecdotally see between the expert coaches, and Aidan is one of them, and the novice coach, is how they see the game. Not necessarily what they see about the game, but how they see it. Another thing that silent observation affords us as coaches is the opportunity for players to make decisions unencumbered by us. So silence is essential to the development of decision making. Everybody's forgotten about the cards framework, but it's okay. When we're in a game, and we've measured this again, players hear very little from the coach, and they pay attention to even less. So they aren't being informed by a lot of stuff that we say, particularly at novice or participation type club level. So we need to facilitate their ability to cope in that environment within training sessions, and part of that is just us being quiet. And that's a really important behaviour. Being silent. Do you watch Great British Bake Off? Do you watch Britain's Got Talent? Do you watch any of those talent? You're totally missing out. What do they do before they announce the results? Yeah. And the winner of tonight's Great British Bake Off is... What does that gap do? Oh, what? It makes you go like that, doesn't it, towards the TV? That's what you want your players to do. When the coach talks, they want to, come on coach, tell me something great. So if we can create a situation where silence creates impact, we're utilizing a behavior, because silence is a behavior, to make another behavior better. So we use the time that we're silent to notice things and think about what we're going to do next. We let players make decisions whilst they're in that space and time. And then when we do step in, it's really, really good. And they pay attention because now it's meaningful and the coach has got something to say. So be more like Noel Fielding or whoever it is that gives the results show. Aidan's already alluded to this. Positioning, something we've been working on here. Now, anybody figure out what these numbers might mean? That's an interesting intervention by me. Okay, you can think a bit. Say again?
The order in which you should have.
Good guess, no. I like the fact that you guessed though. No, it's got nothing to do with the hierarchy, if you like. So you can think about it as we go through. You'll find out at the end. Think about what I've maybe just done in terms of this word. Positioning. So Aidan and Jimmy have been working on positioning. What they used to do was to spend quite a bit of time standing together, conferring about what they were going to do, which you could see reflected in Jimmy's behavioural profile. Jimmy and Aidan's behavioural profile would be slightly different, by the way. And so what we looked at was working on something called Compass. Jimmy and Aidan don't just coach by themselves, they often have other coaches here working with them. So what we've created is that on the session plans there is a training lead and a feedback lead. The person who is in charge of the action, maybe refereeing the game, giving instructions and so on, is doing that job, and their voice, heard by the players, is to do with how they should play the game or do the activity that's in front of them. The other person, let's say Aidan in this context, is the feedback lead, and they are busy noticing stuff as much as they can to construct really good feedback. Because I would suggest that as a referee, as the coach in charge of controlling things, you've got a high cognitive load. You are busy doing things. So your ability to notice is reduced. Whereas Aidan's ability to notice is high, especially in this context where he's relatively quiet and I'm relatively active. So we've created that situation, and we try and get them and the other coaches to operate around the points of a compass, which can point anywhere, by the way, but if somebody's at south, we'd ideally like somebody maybe at north, east, west, or maybe somebody on an angle getting a different perspective on this stuff. So by doing these things, we are noticing deliberately different aspects of the play, which informs better feedback, and we also encourage the points of those compass together to come together at times to share what they're noticing and how that might inform what comes next. So often you would see, if you were here watching training, the coaches conferring with each other immediately before they go in to give feedback, which again links into our next option, silent coaching huddles, where the players are giving themselves some feedback and we're discussing what we might then go in and say later. So silent coaching huddles are a thing where, well, we've been doing them for quite a bit now. You guys were doing them before I came even. We call the group together, we blow the whistle for the end of that activity time, and we leave the players to it. And we might scaffold or facilitate that process a bit, so we might allow them to come in. And it depends how comfortable you are feeling uncomfortable, but we like to sometimes just stand and look at them until they figure out that maybe they could fill that vacant space with information. And other times we'll tell them, this is up to you, off you go. But again, that's a really good time for us to notice, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a second.
I think there's a natural thing to fill the void, to fill the silence. So after a while, people will come out with it.
There is. We'll talk about that in the context of questioning. I would challenge whether we want our players to be made to talk because they feel uncomfortable. We might want to do that a little bit because that might be the little nudge that they need. But we need to also be careful about, well, who does that facilitate talking? Because it's usually the ones who feel fairly comfortable to pipe up who will try and fill that void.
Just on that, by the way, in the academy, the record is like over a minute for a silent huddle without anyone speaking. So, yeah, it is a long time, and it's uncomfortable and it agitates the players. However, now it's just, again, it's created an environment where they know if we don't lead straight off, they've got to start thinking and discussing.
So if you have two different groups, like say you have extrovert and introvert, would you have, like, could you have two separate groups? So you try to challenge introverts to come out and speak within their group?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a huge amount of evidence that supports the idea of ability-based grouping. Typically, mixed-type grouping works well. That's in education across a range of different contexts, and it's because we want to see people who are maybe deficient in some areas notice what other people are proficient at. So if we always have them in the same ability groups, they're just seeing people that are equally as deficient or proficient as they are. So we like to mix that up, I would say. You could support that through different strategies. Questioning might be one of them. And I'll give you some examples, actually, one example of that a bit later on. But that's a good question in the context of how might we facilitate people to talk who don't normally talk. And
They might prefer the one-to-one rather than it doesn't actually affect their ability on the pitch. I think it's just that their traits. So rather than trying to push them and encourage them to do something that they're not comfortable in doing, that might have an impact on the pitch. So I have to just work out something else to get that information from.
exactly, and as the example is I'm going to give, so we keep so much of what we do as coaches secret from players. Do you feel comfortable if you led the next discussion? Why don't we just ask, like maybe precede that, right, Steve, tell us the answer. If we've maybe had that conversation earlier, that might give us some good information about how we want to interact with that person. And as we build our understanding and our relationship with them over time, that will support us to do a better job of that. Questioning was something that a lot of people mentioned. It's very fashionable. Asking lots of questions, whoever said that, I'm sorry, it isn't very good. Asking really good questions is really good. And we've got again, some evidence that coaches are moving towards this questioning type approach, often because it's pushed on coach education courses. We need to ask good questions, not just more of them. And so some of this stuff will help you to reflect on the types of questioning that you do. Questioning is valuable because in the context of a team sport, it promotes those things. Self-reflection, reflection on others, promotes knowledge and creativity through interaction. Well done. Good man. You're on it now. The cards are coming through. So if we ask a question, it opens up, or it may open up, possibilities that enable people to think creatively, to solve problems that they might face on the pitch. It also gives us some useful information about what they understand. I would take issue with the idea that questioning is merely used in order for us to assess whether they've got better or learned stuff. Because people can talk a good talk without necessarily walking a good walk. So if we're asking people questions, that gives us a clue, but we maybe want to go and see if they can actually do the stuff that they've just answered the questions about. We want to actively engage people in interactions so that they are getting better at sharing information, which is something that is reinforced a lot through what the academy do. If they pay little attention to what the coach says whilst they're on the pitch, playing, and they experience problems that they've got to solve, interacting with each other and sharing information is essential to increasing their learning and performance. So we want them to be really good and comfortable at doing that. And there was a great example when the under-18s coaches came up. They did a silent huddle, and one of our players stepped in and went, right, 3 good things that we've done and 2 things that we can do better at. For a 14, 15-year-old, that's a pretty exceptional thing to do in front of a group of older athletes than themselves, to know how to structure a conversation and to facilitate people doing better. And do you know what the best thing is that they did after that? They shut up and let other people talk. That guy should probably give up on playing and start coaching, because they're going to be really good when they grow up. they're a good player as well, so they'll stick at it for a while. So we want to promote these interactions. So when we pose questions, we shouldn't just pose them in a dyadic way, a one-to-one, and I'm going to wait until you get the right answer that I'm looking for, and then when we've got that, then we can move on. Let people talk. Don't necessarily get an answer. So I didn't get an answer before, did I, about what those numbers might mean? I sent you back out to have another go and think a bit more as we progress through, because maybe you'll get some more clues in the game. And maybe the fact that you've got a question in your head and there's a problem to solve will lead you to explore the game creatively. So, there are different types of questions. Convergent questions are questions that have a limited number of answers. Yes, no's, and that kind of thing. They are useful because they can draw our attention to solutions. Would you run, pass, or kick here? Maybe that person wasn't aware of the principles of play and how we might want to go forward. So you've scaffolded their potential answers by giving them 3 options. Run, pass, or kick here. Maybe the next time you ask that question, you would remove that scaffolding and you would just say, how would we go forward here? See if they've learned something, and then see if they can actually demonstrate it. Convergent questions draw our attention to a narrow point. Divergent questions open up possibilities. They draw attention to alternatives and creative ways of thinking. So, how might we play from this line out in our 22? Well, there's about 1 billion ways that you could play from the line out in the 22. So you've just opened up the possibilities. Again, there isn't a right way of doing this. It's knowing when to use which of those different types of questions that we might want to get some outcomes from. So we're running short on time. We might want to keep the options narrow. We've got some time, and we need to facilitate creativity and some interventions from the players themselves. So we might ask a more open, divergent question. Recall questions are about remembering stuff. So this is about information that they've previously known. So we might ask the players, what are our principles of play? To see whether they know what it is. So again, valuable. Value-based questions require somebody to give you information about how they feel about things. So would you feel comfortable leading the next huddle? That's going to tell you something about them as a person, emotionally, and how they feel about that, their values and beliefs. Again, they can be really valuable if we're trying to understand our players. So we need all of these different questions at different times. It's not that one's better than the other. I suggest that we probably want to start at the open end of the continuum and narrow back if it's necessary. So start creatively and then scaffold if necessary. A bit like we want to start with a game and then maybe change the constraints of that game to focus on certain things if it requires that. Interrogative framing is simply the who, what, where, why, when, how questions. So we need interrogative framing in order to ask convergent, divergent, value-based questions. And each of those, if you like, the word that goes at the beginning, who would be best to pass the ball to there? How would you get the ball from there to there? When would you time that? They all create different possibilities for answers. What this also requires us to think about is the tone of voice that we use. Why did you do that? Sounds very different to why did you think about that? So it's not just about the content, it's about the delivery. And again, some of the PhD stuff that I did was on the back pitches at Murrayfield. And there is no better place in the world to understand the impact of weather conditions on the coaching process, because the coach thought that they were providing really nice information, some praise and feedback to a player who was over there, and the player's perception was, that coach does not like what I've just done. Because they're having to project their voice in a shouty way in order to get the information across. So we need to understand how we're giving the information as well as what we're doing. Wait time. Wait time links back to silence. We have some good evidence that if you wait 3 or more seconds after posing a question, you will get better information. So what will you get if you wait 3 or more seconds? Yeah. So we need to give people time to think. What we frequently see from coaches, not these coaches, but other coaches, is how would we move the ball now? Okay, so if we didn't move the ball like we just moved it, how would we move it instead? No, I think you're maybe not understanding. And they've reframed the question 8 times in 10 seconds, and the player's like completely bamboozled about what they're actually asking for. Give them time. And if they can't figure it out, okay, that's the challenge. See if you can find the answer out. Off you go back into the activity. When you've figured out the answer, stop the activity and then we can move on. So wait time is really, really valuable. And it's, I suspect 3 seconds is probably the thing that at the end of this you'll say is what you're going to do differently. Just a hunch, I think. Feedback. So feedback was a thing that lots of people put their hand up for. We're talking about augmented feedback because we get task intrinsic feedback from the environment we're in. So the way that the activity is set up will tell us some stuff about whether we're doing it well or not well. Okay, if we've identified that we score by crossing the white line, each time we cross the white line, we're getting some feedback that we've achieved the objective. We also get proprioceptive feedback, so feedback from our bodies, the ways that our muscles, nerves, and so on operate within time and space. So we get that information back from ourselves, and we get feedback back from each other. So most of you are paying attention, some people are talking to each other at the moment, and that's giving me some feedback that either they've heard something interesting that they want to talk about, or I'm really boring and should move on to the next point. Okay, but we get that, but we get that information from people's body language, from how they behave, from what they look like and sound like, and so on and so forth. So augmented feedback is the stuff we add into the mix. There are different types of feedback, just like there are different types of questioning. Knowledge of performance is about the process. You achieved that outcome by doing this. That would be feedback about performance. Knowledge of results is about what just happened. We hear a lot of, great try. Well, I've rarely seen any bad tries that people would be disappointed about scoring. So as a coach, is that useful information to enhance the learning process? Did that player not realise they'd just scored a try? Could we have added something in that would be more useful to promote further learning? The way that you delayed that pass before the try was fantastic. That would probably facilitate a bit more learning because they're already delighted that they've crossed the line. We see this in football as actually a really good example. If we've got a cone here and a cone here, and if you kick the ball into this zone, you get 5 points, and if you kick the ball into that zone and that zone, you get 1 point. They are getting task intrinsic feedback from the activity. You don't need to tell them whether they've done well or not because they can count their own score. They can know how well they've performed. So as you'll see from the way that Aidan constructs his activities, you will be able to learn a lot from how well you are doing in the activity by yourselves. Really, really important.
Some coaches within football, anyway, some coaches try and push it up on you to overdo that. Yes, well done. Be completely over the top.
Yeah.
Is that in any way detrimental?
Yeah, we're going to talk about valence, which is about the content or the positivity of the...
Sometimes it just becomes noise, doesn't it? Yeah.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, if you'll excuse the language, the Scotland coach talked about bullshit praise. So most of you will know when somebody's just fluffing.
I was like that. So I gave a lot of praise.
Yeah, you changed that quite a lot.
I needed to be specific, and I needed to be impactful, which you spoke about earlier in terms of questioning. So I would say a lot of, well done, Tommy, awesome mate, well done. But he doesn't know. He's got other things to reflect on. He could be thinking that he did something completely different than what I was thinking. So again, we had a discussion, and I then said that I needed to be more specific and then impactful. Make eye contact or do something that they remember. It might have just been that pass. The way that you weighted that pass to John there was fantastic. He now knows what I'm talking about, and there's a common understanding. That was a big thing for me.
Yeah, common understanding is a really, really, really good thing. So I think when we're operating in a team environment, common understanding is pretty important to us doing things well together. So that process is facilitated well by what Aidan just talked about. Internally focused and externally focused. This is about the focus of attention that the feedback conveys. So internal focus of attention draws attention to things our bodies have just done in the way that they've moved in a coordinated way. So I might say, I really liked the way, or I'd like you next time, whilst we're taking this conversion, to shift your weight from your non-kicking leg to your kicking leg as you go through the ball. That would be internally focused feedback, because I am getting them to think about what their body's doing. Externally focused feedback would be, as you kick the ball, I want you to shift your body weight towards the target. So from watching me just do those two very basic demonstrations, what was the difference? Okay, so what was different about the shape of my body?
Well, when you're talking about actually shifting weight, the other foot, the way you approach the ball is different from when you fall and shifting weight.
Yeah.
You moved further on the one you said shift towards where you kicked in.
Yeah, I moved further. Yeah.
When you said just to shift your weight.
Good noticing, well done. Yeah.
We were thinking about the first one a lot more, and it went a lot slower.
It's more specific.
Yeah. Well, where did my head go? Did you notice?
Down.
Down. Okay, so if we're coaching kicking, one of the things we might want to do is keep our chest to the target and go right through the ball. The shunt, that aspect would be called. So there is good evidence that externally focused feedback leads to different or better outcomes for athletes than internally focused feedback. So I hear quite a lot of internally focused feedback, particularly where it comes to closed skills or complex skills. So stuff to do with the scrum. No, you want to put your hand here, and you want to do this, and you want to feel like that in your shoulder. And let's find a different way of communicating that, so that we're focusing on an external focus of attention. The science behind this is essentially that if we give information that focuses our attention internally, we interrupt the coordinated patterns of movement that our body has learned in order to produce the skill. And therefore it breaks down and gets worse. As opposed to focusing the attention of that skill better towards a more positive outcome and allowing the coordinated pattern of movement that we've already developed to just happen well. Okay, so some of the stuff that we've done we don't want to interfere with, we just want to let our bodies do what they've already learned to do well. Valence is about the positivity and the emotional outcome of the feedback that we give. And we could take that on a continuum from, physical punishment to emotional praise, high levels of positivity. It is not the case that we want to bombard people with positive praise. Okay? We want to make sure that athletes understand, just people, not necessarily athletes, people understand that they can trust us. And the evidence suggests that rather than praise, trust in the person giving the feedback is far more important to the perceptions of the athlete. So the idea that hollow rhetoric or just empty praise is a bad thing was again supported by my PhD, but there's plenty of other research out there that you could read about that. So make it authentic, and a bit like sugar, anything in too much of a quantity becomes sickly. So we want it to have impact. So sprinkle it sparingly during the session. Okay. And the reason for doing that is one of the reasons for doing that is that we want feedback to be used formatively rather than summatively. And all we're talking about there is as part of a continuing learning process versus an end summary of what's just happened. Okay, and that links into this idea of stretch. That's why the elastic bands are there. Aidan, one of the interventions I did with Aidan was to get him to wear an elastic band. So I just gave him an elastic band, and at first he didn't really understand what it was there for. But we want to harness the positive emotional state that praise gives to somebody in order to take them further, to stretch them further. So, as part of our formative feedback process, which continues the learning process rather than ends it, we're going to praise somebody and then we're going to stretch them a bit further. I love the way that you delayed that last pass in the 2-on-1. Can you find another 3 2-on-1s in the next 2 minutes? Praise, emotional uplift, stretch, can you do this now? So we're not just communicating a level of expectation that they have to hit the next time to get the same thing, which is one of the problems with using continual praise. Because if you praise somebody in an empty way, what you're doing is that you're communicating to them, you think that is about what they can achieve. And if they just got lucky, or if they achieved substantially below their performance capability, but you like throwing out a bit of positivity, you're reinforcing that it's acceptable and that you like them to perform at that level. And for some people, you're telling them, my expectations for your ability are pretty low. Okay. So we need to pick and choose how we give positive feedback. And I think we need to take advantage of the opportunity to stretch people and to make them think about how they can do it. So my 4-year-old, he's quite funny. His environment has now coached him so that when I was leaving the house this morning, he said, what's the best thing that's going to happen today to you, Daddy? And I said, I'm going to go and work with some coaches and we're going to talk about some of the stuff that they do, and hopefully I'm going to learn some stuff from them. And he said to me, which is what I say to him all the time, I bet you don't learn 3 things from them. So that's my challenge. I've got to learn 3 things to you, or I'm going to disappoint my son. So the implication is you've got to do some good stuff. But we do that quite a lot. You would say we do that now a lot. So often we'll see stuff. The stretch stuff is a big thing.
Yeah, and where it's been most powerful is when they have done it, when they've achieved their stretch challenge, and then it's a really powerful moment for you as the coach and the player, because you know that's a really impactful session. They'll walk away from that always remembering it, because you gave them first some positive reinforcement, then you gave them an additional challenge to make it even better, or the session even better for them. And then when they do it, and you see them do it, what do they do when they achieve it? What would you expect from them?
To look around for you. Yeah, around for you.
And then all you do is you just...
Yeah, probably one of the most powerful coaching moments that Aidan had this year was where I'd set him the challenge to have a thumbs up moment with a player. So they had a very specific target. He'd helped to generate that target with them. It was done in a very personal way, close by to them, not in front of everybody else. It was self-referenced. And when it happened, Aidan's physical interaction was literally just... And that probably meant more to that player than any verbal feedback would have done. I have just noticed you doing that, and that is good. Well done. And they're probably my favourite interactions I have with my kids, are just the nice one. From the PhD, this was a really important aspect of what the coach talked about, was that they spent time noticing everybody so that the players felt like they'd been observed and that the time and care had been put into them. And that's a good example. Sorry, Rob.
Just interesting on the feedback process in terms of this has all come from a coach's point of view, and I've been trying to challenge my players to come back and ask for feedback, and that stops me jumping in when I think they want it until they actually want it, and that makes it more useful in terms of them asking for it and taking it on board. So it's all about, so far so good about the coaching of the player.
Yeah, and we've done a little bit about self-selected feedback. It's actually something that's in the programme for our continued development. So that a player will have set their own self-referenced goals, and this is a key part of this stuff, is that the best kind of goals and feedback we can give are when they are self-referenced rather than normative. In other words, where they compare themselves against other people. So you got 3 get the ball backs tonight, or you turned the ball over 3 times. And that is 2 better than the last game. That's fantastic. Not, that person just got 4 and you managed to get 5. Well done, that's great. Because we want it to be personally meaningful to them in the context of their longer term development. And it might be at this stage that they're either better than or just not quite as good as the person that's next to them. And to come back to Rob's point, one of the things that we can then do with that is we can get them to think about what their own objectives are. I really want to work on my jackling skills. So then Aidan will facilitate that. Well, give me a number. How many turnovers are you going to get through jackling tonight? Or how many attempts are you going to make through jackling tonight? And maybe come and give me a tap at a point when you'd like me to give you some feedback about how you think that's gone. So then it raises their self-awareness of, I've just done a good jackal, or it just didn't go quite so well, and I'm not sure why. I need to go and seek some further information in order to develop that learning. And I think that's an interesting point that's raised about that, yeah.
Just on that as well, you're looking to create a culture where they openly want to receive feedback. Something that we would do, that we try to do here, is when they come up and they ask for some, first thing you do is praise. It's just another bit of feedback. Hey, well done, first of all. Come and ask you, that's really cool. So, and then go on to those questions. So that praise is just, it's some initial feedback. They're doing a really good thing.
Yeah.
And then suddenly that'll
engage with them as well.
Immediately they're relaxed. They're thinking, oh, they're a really good thing.
Right,
it's just feedback.
Why you want to speak to them?
Yeah. Yeah, and sorry, just
No, carry on.
so a story from today, a player came up to me and goes, got a challenge for me, is there something that, and I just went, well, what do you want to get better at? What's in your IDP, your development plan, what do you want to get better at? And he goes, I want to be better at getting the ball back, so that's what just reminded me. And I just went, well, how do you think your strengths can get you the ball back in this game today? What are you thinking? And he goes, well, I'm really good at interceptions. So you got to get at least 2 then. He goes, all right, no problem. He said, what about anything else? He goes, well, I've noticed that if I hit someone when they tackle the ball, like a man and ball tackle, I have a really good chance of getting up and just taking it back off them or ripping it in the tackle. Oh, you got to get 2 of them. He's providing his own feedback there, pretty much, and he's just asking for some reassurance from me as the coach.
Yeah.
And then, out there, he was attempting it. Like, I could see him getting passing lanes and able to jump for balls and stuff. And then the feedback for him wasn't coming from me, it was coming from the game. So then my question to him after the game was, mate, that was awesome, I saw you trying it. What did the game give you? And he goes, maybe I should have gone into the space a little bit later so that when the pass was coming, then I said it, as opposed to get to the space and hope it comes to me. He's coaching himself there. I don't have to say anything.
Well, no, I would disagree with that. He hasn't learned that without you.
Correct.
It's just a different way of coaching that. And that the structure that you put in place was essential to that learning process. If you just left it, yeah.
We coach structures and defensive structures and that. The kids just whoever is scared to step up to that plan.
It's just exploring the game and defence in particular, and ways to get the ball back. And he failed in the game, but he learned a lot from failing.
What do you feel?
The ball went over his head. They run 50 metres up the pitch, so he has to make a tackle.
He knocked on once as well.
He knocked on once. Well, you watched the game. You saw him try and that, didn't you? Like, yeah. We don't even, we watched the same game, however, we know exactly what player I'm talking about, because you can see that he was learning and stuff.
I hope you can't feel it.
You saw him sitting off a little bit more and then leaving a little bit later. He'll go home and just think about it. I think that's the great thought. The fact that we've
he began to intercept. He was looking to intercept the ball towards the end, where initially he was trying to intercept the pass. So he was reading the pass, and he was there too early. So he was just hanging off.
So the guy that made the pass was making better decisions.
He was lobbing it over.
Whereas he's just now, right, I'll wait for him to pass the ball. There you go. feedback. The games provide the feedback for him to be able to go, now I understand, I get it, I've been in the moment, learn through that.
And I think the product of that, the knock-on, the unintended consequences of that process is that your relationship with that player is better because of those interactions. You are not just a person doing coaching to them, you're doing learning with them. And I would suggest that's a really good aim as a coach, is to be learning with your players rather than coaching at them. Something to think about.
Is you, going off subject, but as you turn your references to cards, how many times you refer to cards? Because I've got you one ahead. If you're thinking that's 10, I've got you as 11.
No, that's some interesting thoughts. Good feedback from me about how many times. Interesting. The other thing that I would say about formative and summative, the timing of our feedback we've worked on here. Give feedback at a time that it can be actioned, not just at the end of the activity. I often see that. So we've now just finished the thing in which you could practice what I'm about to tell you, but here's something you want to know about that. Right, on we go, something else. Well, maybe they could have gone and put that right, or maybe they could have gone and done it again if it was a good thing, if you just let them carry on. So time your feedbacks so that they can then try again. If they got it right or if they got it wrong, let them have another go so they can find a better way, or they can reinforce what went well. Give them time to implement the feedback. Yeah, players want consistently high expectations from coaches because they can deal with the consistency of that. But ones that are realistic and achievable and all that smart stuff. Okay, and if you can negotiate that with your athletes rather than dictate it to them, and if you can make it about their needs and their development rather than about comparisons to others, all the more powerful it will be. Okay, some last things. Some other considerations. These are 3 things that we've been trying to do, which you might see from Aidan, and hopefully we'll see from you when you coach. Ninja or stealth coaching is something that ninja coaching is probably one of the things that you will remember tonight just because it conjures up a powerful image. But coaching where everybody's busy and we're just going, so I want to think about this and maybe a bit of feedback, and everybody else is still getting on with the session. Stealth coaching, where we are not interrupting stuff, but having some good learning interactions with our athletes. So providing feedback. Do we need to stop the whole group? Are they all going to learn from what happens next? If they're not, don't stop the whole group. Help the ones learn that need to, and then let everybody else get on with the game. Phased instructions is another mechanism for allowing the game to get going rather than you to be talking. So phased instructions, and hopefully we'll see this outside, would be 3 bits of information, go. Rather than, so this is the parameters of the pitch, and then this is, and if you get touched, you've got to do this, go down, then the ball goes between your legs. Once the 3rd player along the back line gets it, there's got to be this move. If they do that move, then you can play in this space, but if they don't do that move, then they've just forgotten the first 5 bits of information you've given them. Okay, the boundaries of the pitch are that side of the room, that side of the room. To score a try, you've got to get across that line or that line and put the ball down. A tackle happens when this occurs. Any questions? Go. Some time for them to understand and explore how that set of instructions work. Okay, pause. From now on, if a tackle like this happens, you must do the following. On you go. So now you've got to the game that you originally intended, but you've got there in a series of steps that didn't require them to listen to 50 bits of information. It required them to explore 3 bits of information with some stuff on top. And it got them going quickly. And even though it might be dealing with the same end product, I pretty much guarantee that the process of you getting there will be overall quicker than if you'd spent 10 minutes trying to explain the activity first. Final thing, match-like timings and restarts. I need to look at my notes for this because there's some actual information that I need to convey. Okay, so the game of rugby is the game of rugby, and it has some structures in it, and we want people to learn in a rugby realistic environment. I think most people would see the logic in that process. first phase possession is a core structure of the rugby game. A kick-off, a scrum, a line-out, penalty, whatever it is. We know, for example, from the A-League game, before we played Bath about a month ago, a bit over that when the ball went out of play for a line-out, it took them about 130 seconds to get the ball back into play. So there was a break in play of 130 seconds. And when the ball was knocked on or there was an issue and it caused a scrum, the break in play was approximately 70 seconds. So the challenge to Jimmy, who was coaching the environment, was your feedback, your transitions between activities, your breaks in play can be somewhere between 70 and 130 seconds and nothing else. Because that's what they're going to experience when they next play Bath. If they're going to share information with each other in order to learn from the game, they need to be able to do that in 70 seconds or less. Otherwise the game will have restarted. If we're going to provide them some information, we need to be able to do that quickly, otherwise the game will have restarted. So base your coaching around the nature of the game. We also know, if you look at the World Cup statistics for the England under-20s, that they're on average 29 lineouts, 15 scrums, 39 kicks, and approximately 9 kick restarts in every game. So I've challenged these coaches to include more of those in their sessions. And it doesn't mean we're doing a full 8-on-8 scrum or going back to the halfway line for every kickoff. It just means that within the confines of the pitch there's going to be a one-on-one body height scrum contest, and whoever has the best body shape gets the ball. But now we've got a picture that looks somewhat familiar to the game of rugby, where there's an offside line and a group of people, we might call the backs, stand away from that contact area or that interaction, and that looks something like what we see in a game. And we could structure the session to have 39 of those and 17 of the others, because that's what is in a game of rugby. So we're trying to push the level of realism that the players experience in order to prepare for making decisions, being creative, and so on and so on and so on, in ways that are relevant to the game. And Aidan's been checking his watch, which tells me we've probably overrun. Oh, okay. But that body language maybe tells me that that's a good point to finish on. Good feedback. So I'll explain what we're going to do. We're going to go outside. I'm going to skip past this.
Well, actually, we're not.
Oh, we're not?
No. I've got a better idea.
Oh, I like this. Is this good creativity, or is this...
Oh, this is cards, like, in motion.
Okay.
Is that right?
Oh, I don't know, because I haven't heard the idea.
Is just because I'm conscious that we're finishing at 8:30, and it's just gone 8 o'clock, is I've got some footage of the academy and me mic'd up, and what I'd like you to do is, I'm going to move you around because you've been in the same seat for a while, and I want you to discuss stuff with other people, is I want you to completely critique me and give me some feedback. And also just observe and notice, potentially, notice some stuff which you think, might be good, your eyes, or maybe some stuff you need to do more, and then what we'll do is we'll watch 15 minutes of this, and I'll come in and sit with you guys, we'll have discussions, and watch me as the coach, not the players, because we're here to get better as coaches, not necessarily to feedback to players. So feedback to me, and then we'll have a discussion about it, and we'll. I just think by the time we get on the pitch and we get back in and have reflections, we might miss some opportunity to get some stuff. Is that okay?
Good. Good adaptation and
flexibility. So I've randomly picked. I've just literally gone to a space in time. I'll give you the context. This is pre-season. For our under 16 group. If it does go into the running stage, we'll just fast forward because they do need to do some running stuff. More than likely, I don't know, I haven't watched this. This is complete cards in motion. I haven't briefed this. I don't know. Stop doing that. I don't know what we're discussing. I don't know what the outcome of the session we were looking for. It's probably the principles of play. And it is pre-season, so it would be a lot of high-tempo-y stuff. However, let's just watch it, and actually first you got to move. You got to go sit somewhere else, find somebody else to have a discussion with. Footballers, I'm sorry, you're going to be agitated now. Yeah. Alright, and we're starting in 10.
Is that sound going to be enough for them to hear?
Sorry.
Is it about sound or pretty loud?
We'll get some speakers.
That might work, yeah. How do you feel about the position you've chosen? Oh yeah? Do you want to choose somebody? Who do you think you'd like to learn from that you haven't met before? Or can you remember anybody's name that you met before that you haven't met before? Okay.
Okay, so
yeah, go on.
let's have some discussions. Don't just be in silent. Talk to each other. Say here, yellows. You've got 30 seconds to have a discussion. You've already wasted 3 or 4.
With more intensity and intensity. We say we've got a man, but after about...
What's your defensive strategy? Someone sum it up in very quick words. I'm going to see a lot of wristbands against wristbands and do it 2 bits. Okay, I want to see that. That'll be cool. Good strategy. How are you getting on, alright? Any choice? Yeah. One kick up pass. One kick up pass. Contest. There was definitely a way to get the ball back there for sure. If you thought about it. Or what? Tom, you should have this, mate. You're smart. Nice kick. Well played, Sam. Well done, mate. That's a turnover. It was a 2-pass play. Work it out. You alright, Tyler? What's up, mate? That's alright. You alright? Yeah, just steps over there, the physios, mate. Just go and see one of those girls that look after you. If you're okay to walk over there. Alright, mate. Top stuff. Where's the space, guy? Are you sure? I like that, mate. That wasn't a 3-pass play, that's a turnover. Can somebody count if I ask a poor question? I've already got one.
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah. Can we count those? Get your clickers out, coaches. One opportunity. Good ball movement and good information as well. How about you? Right, you're reffing. I want to see how many turnovers you can make through just touching guys, okay? Just touching bibs. Yes, mate, of course, yeah. There's Kyle there on the phone, look. Good pass, great support. Oh, unlucky, but we play on. Tom? How many so far? How many? Oh, mate.
No, it's doing on this. I'm showing them to good bits on bits and bounds and bounds.
Okay. What are you going to do? What are you going to change about what you're doing then? Yeah, sorry, I'll keep an eye on that. That's fair comment. You got to go and do something different, eh? No, there's no knock-ons in this, mate. Great kick, Jack Lewis. Yeah, it is, get it. It is, that's yours, mate. It is. Well done, it is. Yeah, really. It is, that's too slow though, mate. We've got to play quick. No score. Let's go. Here we go. If you get in, it's a turnover. I'm lucky. No 1-2s. Turn it over. What's your strategy, son?
against any of them, Steve, as easy as possible. Alright, so just work out. Yeah, so it's not good. Okay, so can you get rid of it? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, boom. Where's the opportunity? There you go, there's one. Unlucky, Tris, unlucky. Yeah. Great kick. Turn over. Yes, I need this opportunity. Where is it? Straight on. Well done. It's going to be a free pass play. No. Oh, well done. Good support. Tommy, your score. Yeah. Good defence, Tristan. Again. Grabs up the drink. Fred, I'll have to do it when there's actually a more rugby specific game. I'll do it after Lawrence as well.
Why are you trying to lie?
I'm aware of will we do it. Just while having a drink, get into your groups, a little discussion about that game. What was good? What are we going to do differently? Don't waste this time. 30 seconds of I thought your demo was really good, by the way. Yeah. Feedback on the toe. Explain, isn't it? No, go. You've got to actually show it. Yeah. I wouldn't have thought of doing it that way. I'd have tried to explain it, and yeah, yours was probably better how I would have done it. 10 seconds. Were you the team that came over and strategy? No, defensive strategy. Yes. Was it? And it was about marking? Yeah. Was it? Did I ask you? No. Yeah, you nailed it. No, it wasn't. It was you that came over, yeah? Yeah. What happened to that? We weren't communicating. We covered actually. So you think by exchanging information that's going to fix? Yeah, I think if you map mark, you actually don't have to communicate. You just leave it to them. Okay. Found each other marking the right sort of people, then we had to like speak to not give away space while turning that around. Right, it's getting in the game out of that pitch and you stick with them through it. That's what I thought you meant. Yeah, that's what I thought you meant. What we were trying to do, we're not going back into the game, but one line. Just like trying to stick with wristbands, but if we just nominate one player each to stick on the great thinking, mate, yeah. Okay, you're to Lawrence. Sorry, I thought that's what you meant from the start. But you were actually exchanging bits and bits, so it was going on, you and him, okay.
Right. I feel quite vulnerable now. Any thoughts?
Just on the
By the way, sorry to go across you just before I say this. I do believe I've made a lot of improvements since then.
Yeah, 100%.
Certainly, I wrote down my 5 6 years. Sorry.
Just on the question side of things, like sometimes you give a question but then jump in with the answer yourself.
Yes, I did.
Or change the question after you've asked it. Like if you've asked a question now, just then let it go and see what you come back with.
Yeah, that was definitely. I remember that was a really bad question. That was my first bad question. Because I then tried to rephrase the question and probably made it worse with a really poor question.
On the positive though, I can position it. You give you the opportunity to do a lot of one-to-one. There's a lot of one-to-one going on, and that's because you position them within the game.
I don't 100% agree with that. Because if you stood in the middle of the pitch, you can only see one person. So the idea of having your buddy and your stealth coach, you need somebody outside for you to have a decent impact on what you can see.
Yeah.
What's that constrained by?
There's only one.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So even though that might be a good principle to work towards, I think we've got to recognise when it's more.
The reason I'm in the game there, just to give some context, it's a great point, is that I like to have those one-to-one moments. If I am outside, I can only deal with these wingers or whoever is supporting space over here. So if I'm conscious that if I'm by myself, I've got a ref, but I'm very much, if there's a moment where I can give some feedback, because I've noticed something, I want to be able to do it quickly and you'd have some information around the feedback side of things. If it's not instant, it then becomes a lot more difficult to have traction.
Yeah, it's just called memory decay. So it's just that because we're busy doing more stuff, the clarity of the memory of what that feedback is about is decaying all the time.
It's like you said at the end there, wasn't it? If you can give it at that specific point, they can do something about it. Where if you leave it until the end,
yeah. What we need to be really careful of when we give feedback is that we're not interrupting the decision-making process itself. So it needs to be timed quickly, but we need to leave them to have made the decision or done the action first, completely. Because, again, otherwise we're cutting them off from thinking themselves about how it's gone. So there's a balance.
I didn't know whether you'd asked set too many challenges within the game, so then they lost focus on the overall objective. I don't know whether that's maybe,
I think with
me, I'd never give more than one challenge to a player in the moment. So if I can remember Tom, the guy who I was talking to first when I gave the kick, do you remember I said contest possession? His was how many times can you get the ball back? Because he's an attacking player.
Yeah.
So he would think a lot about on the ball stuff, whereas I wanted him to think off the ball stuff.
That's why you took out the 2-on-1, just the 2-on-1.
No, I had in that game we had you could only score from a 3-pass play, so someone couldn't just run the whole lane, and you couldn't 1-2 it. Me and you couldn't run the 50. But for Tom, for that guy that I was giving the challenge to initially, the very first challenge was when I kicked it up. It was 1-touch turnover, and he went for the ball. I was like, hey, you can definitely get the ball back one way and get one of your challenges. Maybe I was a little bit hasty on giving him that feedback. I think a better opportunity would be to throw it up, let them compete for the ball, and then he competes, the other guy win, the ball plays on, and go, did you think about getting the ball back there? Maybe differently? Because all you had to do is let the guy catch it and then touch it, and he gets it back. So, yes, I could have done that a lot better.
And with the 1-1 there, what I noticed as well, those little interactions 1-1, it made the whole rest of the session them just getting on with it. So it was that good thing that actually having those little 1-1, it took you out of, it stops you interjecting in the rest of the game.
Yeah, there's 2 reasons why I do that. One is the best moments I ever had as a player were when the coach and I were having an one-to-one. They were the best. And the coach came up to me and went, this is some feedback. This was what you do that's really good. Could you explore this? And some of the moments that I definitely remember as well were quite negative ones where I just got told how bad it was. Here's a great story. I used to play at 10 out half. And one of my coaches came up to me, never forget it. He goes, I said, can I get some feedback from the coach? And he goes, yeah, I think you're a great 10, one of the best. But your passing needs to improve, your kicking needs to improve, your running needs to improve, and your tackling. I was kind of like, well, I don't know what
stretch.
yeah. But I remember it. It was a one-to-one, and it was a moment that I had with the coach, so I try and create those as much as I can.
And then a key thing about that is that when people provide information like that, it's remembered because of how it makes you feel emotionally. And what Aidan does really well in here, and what that coach did really badly potentially, is to demonstrate your care for them as an individual. And I think what that distinguishes is coaches who run sessions versus coaches who coach people. And I think if we get anything out of this, it's that you all get better at coaching people. In fact, all of us get better, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do. And I'd say within there, the number of times you built a relationship through demonstrating care was really high, given that we only watched 5. Somebody got injured, you paid proper attention to them.
I think as well, it's a great example, since high tech for pre-season, so you want them to do lots of matching it. And the one-to-ones and the quiet moments within there, it doesn't stop the game. And there's nothing worse than you've got these, what I call tellers, that stop the game and tell about something, and then they go and reinforce it, and then they'll reinforce it for the 4th time, where the lads are just standing around thinking, actually, I wasn't that bothered about that because I was on the wing, so I'd rather kick back in.
I'd much rather play the game.
Yeah, but the other thing is, I've done this as personal to me, the amount of mates that you said there, brothers and son, that sort of that's what we used to do in the military. We can't make because we've got about 400,000 friends, we can't remember all the names. So that potentially might have been not disrespectful to the lads, but maybe if you can bring up the names, it might make
I know that
bit more.
That's one of our work-ons.
The only thing
I need to say names more.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to ask there though was
That's a great observation.
how many times have you, that's pre-season, under 16s, so how many times have you had sessions with them before then?
Yeah, so really good question. There's a couple of players in there which are new to the group, and one of them was the lad, the defensive guy that I tried to challenge defensively. He was new at that stage, he's not anymore. He was new at that stage, so that's why I used his name. However, it's great feedback. Yeah, names are way better.
Because I noticed the innocent Tyler, they'd come up early, so they'd been there longer, so you probably knew them.
I know all of their names. However,
what about them?
Yeah, I know all of their names. However, yeah, they want to know. If I just go, mate, it could be me, it could be you. And he wants that. If he's done something good, he probably wants to know that it was him in front of the group. And here's the story. And we discuss this a lot. We have an MVP at the end of every session. So we would actively ask the group who was MVP. And we are the biggest influencers as coaches of who they think is MVP.
Because of
the praise. Because of who we give praises on it.
And there was a session the other day, and I think you were at it, where the first thing was a guy was training really well, but I was like, right, I'm going to make sure he's MVP. So I just said his name all the time. And then Ed did an incredible job. He went up to another player who we compete with a lot and goes, your job is to make sure he's not MVP by the end of the session. That's your challenge.
he failed miserably as well, because I would have been horrible to that guy.
Actually, was because we as coaches we do have a massive influence. I just kept going, oh, you're on fire, you're nailing it, you're smashing it. And he was just like, how can I have the same influence as well?
And the best bit of coaching that came out of that was probably, I'm going to blow my own trumpet by me, later on, when in the huddle at the end of the session, we talked about how does that link back to the game? Can we spot their strong link, their weak link? How do we recognise when to play to spaces that have certain people in? When do we share that information? Because if I'd been the player that I challenged to make sure that somebody else was not MVP, I'd have got everybody on my team to stand in their channel and make their night an absolute misery. Irrespective of, because selfishly I would just want to be the best player there. But he was too nice, ultimately.
Any more feedback? Yeah?
Give you a challenge.
Oh, sorry.
No, just to give you a challenge, it's something I was challenged to work with delivery and things, is the speed of your delivery. Your voice is just rapid, and I know when you've done something here, somebody like me, when it's that speed, I can't process information quickly.
Great feedback.
What can that facilitate potentially?
Well, it cuts down the thinking time and stuff.
Yeah, so in the stuff that I did with Scotland during the Six Nations, they used speed of voice in the warm-ups to indicate the intensity that they wanted the players to match. So they used the pitch and tone and the speed of their voice to say, come on, we're really up for it today, or actually we need to calm down and think very carefully through how we're going to play now. And you're absolutely right, because the message is the same. The way that we communicates a huge amount of information to other people about what that might mean for what to come.
Yeah. It's exactly that. When you're under pressure, when you get the film and stuff, you speed up rapidly and you try to cram everything in. And it's the same when you're doing sessions and things like that. You try to cram everything in, so you speed up your voice.
Have we seen? Can I borrow your glasses?
You don't want to borrow my glasses, I'll tell you. Double vision in there.
Have we seen how politicians use glasses?
Don't want them.
Ooh. This is the important point. These are the standard points. This is the important point. You can do it the opposite way around and it works exactly the same. So we want our interactions to have impact, and the tone and pitch of our voice conveys that impact. And if we want people to be urgent and excited and actually it's interesting as well, we would use that. And maybe we would flip that around if we want people to really think and listen. We might quieten down a bit more because it forces them to pay attention, and we'd slow our voice down as well. Jimmy and Aidan are quite different in that respect. So Aidan is quite an energetic, energizing person. Jimmy is, well, he has a different thing. His thing's not an elastic band, it's a Satsuma. We'll not tell you about that, so you might ponder on it for a while. But they communicate in quite different ways, and that complements each other, so they get different things out of people when they do that. And that, I think that raises a really, really good point about reflecting on how we're doing that communication.
I didn't let them, I think the moment you're referring to was in the huddle as well. I did speak very quickly.
Yeah.
Just throughout the session, it's quite a lot, and you don't know the kids you're dealing with the nature of the kids I deal with through work and stuff, is the process of speech is very, very different.
But I also, in that huddle, I didn't let them speak enough.
Yeah, you asked.
Now the microphone,
yeah.
But I didn't let them just...
You told them to sort it out themselves, but then stopped over.
And the funny thing was, and I don't know, you can hear maybe the mic is here. They give me their first answer, and I almost go, okay, straight away.
So you just...
Whereas I didn't actively listen.
And also you gave them 30-second feedback at the end.
That's discipline. Yeah.
Aidan, how are you standing?
Yeah. This is my work, aren't I need to stand a little bit better.
So one of the things that we worked on with Aidan...
Sorry, I often used to do this.
I think that conveys a particular... Well, you would particularly do it within huddles, so it's a little bit unstable, and is the information that I'm giving really strong? Whereas, so what your mechanism of dealing with that was to put a rugby ball between your legs and to stand like this, which demonstrates a lot more confidence in the information that you're giving, and you are convincing people that this is good. Did you notice my mechanism for dealing with my body habits in the presentation? I'm doing one of them right now. The pen, because one of my tendencies is to wave my hands around quite a lot. Did anybody notice one of the other ones? I've got my band. That was really just to provide a bit of a mechanism for learning, but good observation. Anything else? Really notice when I did this? No? So one of my things is that my posture's pretty poor, so I will start to droop, and the impact of that is actually on my voice, because I'll start to hurry up, because everything's a bit too constricted, so I will periodically stretch myself out and square myself up a bit, and that will help me to slow down. It's just another thing.
Just because I'm conscious of time, not that I want to stop the feedback. I'm enjoying this. Would you want to just discuss what you put on the board first? Because maybe that's got quite a bit of good thought.
So I thought, given the period of time that there was a lot of questions in there posed during the activity as well as after activity, so problems to solve, things to think about.
Not all of them good.
Not all of them good, some pretty good questions in there. There was a lot more silence than I had time to actually note down. So that the mechanism we use is we look at a behaviour every 3 seconds or less when we're actually coding this stuff. So Jimmy's profile, there was 5,000 behaviours across 4 sessions. Scotland coach, there was 25,000 behaviours across a season of Six Nations preparation. Lots and lots of feedback. Some of it was fairly empty, they probably didn't need it. Others was really, really good and contained stretch, and there were some great examples of that. There were some good responses to questions from players. I don't know if you spotted that, but they obviously feel quite confident, given how young they are in the system, if you like, to approach and ask for information. Loads of challenges, which is great because we're individualising the session. It's not just about you performing within this space as a whole, it's about me paying attention to your needs and what you might need and want to get better at. I thought the best bit of that was just how you tried to build relationships. Mate could be a mechanism for trying to do that, because we all need to remember that we're not 16 years old, and that the verbal habits and the speech tendencies that we have might be quite different than the language that they use. But I would agree that in general, if you'd used a name, that would have probably communicated things more. There were, and I didn't notice all of these down, but there were lots of references specifically to cards and to principles of play. So the reinforcement or the feedback was great information. Well, that's one of the things that we try and push, isn't it? it was about...
So you spoke around, Steve, around the word communication, so we just bin that off, and we would just use exchange of information. So am I giving it to you? Are you able to hear it and listen? Do you listen? Do you actually listen? Potentially, do you respond? And that's also important for us to think about. Are we able to exchange information effectively? So yes, there was some feedback in there for sure, which was unnecessary because they were already getting on with the game. It may have happened miles away. It was taking some points. That is, so it's not poor communication. It's poor exchange of information. He can't hear it, so it's not valid. It's not effective.
The intensity thing that we were talking about before can also be affected by the volume of information that we exchange as a coach. So that might be the beginning of a session and we're actively using information to raise the tempo and the intensity more, and that might trail off as we get into the session where the main content is that we want them to be thinking and learning for themselves. Again, we saw that pattern with the national Scottish team where they changed the volume of information they were giving as the session went on, and it kind of did an inverted U. Or a U, sorry, an inverted N. I've just done what Jimmy does. That's awful.
I just have one question. I'd like you to
Alright.
What I want you to do is just discuss in twos, so whoever's next to you, could you discuss just one thing from everything, or two things, or three things, from what Ed's spoken about before we go into have we achieved kind of what we've done. Just one or two things which you are going to actively change in your behaviour, in your coaching tomorrow, in a week, and potentially into the future. Just have a discussion around what you might do.
And that's really good because on their feedback forms, that's one of the key questions. So that's good awareness. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think that's perfect.
I also feel that, am I going to be they want to notice if they want to that's pretty
I think that as well, because they were asking stuff and you were adding in good examples, they wouldn't have done that if they didn't want to know stuff. So, potentially we do another one of these, we deliberately plan to be in here for less time because they've now got some of this, we're outside showing them. Okay.
Okay, good stuff. I don't need to know any of this. It's your stuff. And I know that there's a similar question or potentially the same question just in the feedback sheet which we want you to fill out. But it's good for you to discuss because potentially now you might actually activate it and go and do it. The one thing so just from my perspective, because we're all here to learn, we're all here to get better at stuff. Just from me, what I'm taking away from this is good questions. Good questions. Not just questions. Good questions. And then a little bit around delivery. How do I do that? How do I make it impactful? I'm thinking about how I could have used the glasses, but without having glasses. And I'm thinking it might be just silence, which you refer to, just going, that is exactly what I want from you, well done. Just as that's a glasses moment, wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
A bit of silence. And then I'm also going to take away from this around the specific feedback. It's something that I've been working on a lot. And it's names. It's what just happened. It's creating moments with the players where that feedback is powerful. So yeah, they're probably the two things I'm going to take away.
Can you write them on the form?
I certainly will.
Have we done any of this? Okay. Good. We'll leave it at that then. What have we done? So I think that highlights about questioning and about convergent versus divergent questions. How have we achieved these things?
I think it's painted quite a good picture of the learning environment, about all the kind of factors around it we're using. silence, like you say, and how to create that kind of.
Anybody agree with that? Anybody disagree? How could that have been better? You get asked that question in the feedback form, so tell me how it could have been better. Critical considerations? Do we understand what that means now? I'm trying to look for the person that was asking that. Was it?
Yeah.
You feel? What does good look like?
Not what was on that video.
Is there a specific good?
That was a good session.
That's how we define it.
There's many things, isn't there? Good many things.
Yeah.
And
We've
maybe
been
good
able
looks
to
like
discuss what.
players leaving happy.
That would be an important question I'd ask my players at the end of it, by the way. Enjoy that.
I probably wouldn't. So my philosophy used to include enjoyment, but it doesn't anymore.
Why not?
That depends on the level you're working at. If you're now in sort of professional athlete, whereas if you're working with you want to.
So do you think professional athletes, they shouldn't have?
I think it's probably more important with professional athletes, to be honest.
It's a major part of it.
I'm just part of it.
You know what I mean? There's different responsibilities on the players at the level that they're different expectations you expect.
Job at the end of the day.
It is an absolute
How many people every day enjoy the job? Not everyone. Whereas some of the kids are turning up to school and it's taking a little bit more.
The enjoyment side of things isn't just for the player and the group that you're with, it's for you as a coach as well. If you're not enjoying it, you're not putting 100% in.
Or you just not having fun.
Yeah, that's it.
So what's your name, sorry? Adam. That basically explains the answer to why, isn't it? Because I don't think that it can be achieved. So what used to be enjoyment is now fulfillment. And I think that's more achievable for me as a coach, is to help people feel fulfilled, of which a component might be enjoyment. That might be because they come to my sessions in order to enjoy them. And one of the most enlightening moments from the time that Rob and I were involved together was when I asked the university players that I coached, some of whom had won World Cups, why do you play for this team? And none of the players that I expected to write down, because I want to win and get better and perform, wrote that down. Because they'd stepped down effectively from their high-level thing, even though we paid them to come over and play effectively. They were there to enjoy it because it was a release from the pressure of their high-level rugby. That's a pretty stark difference in why people are there. So my mechanism for helping them feel fulfilled was different than if I'd just been going for enjoyment. And I feel like I can apply that in every aspect of my life. So in the lecturing that I do, I don't think necessarily people turn up with the expectation of enjoying the lectures or enjoying this environment necessarily, but hopefully you go away feeling more fulfilled by it. That would be, I would challenge you to come and tell me if you feel less fulfilled or a way in which you could have been more fulfilled by this, because that would be really useful for my philosophy.
I think youngsters tend to look for enjoyment over fulfilment. They're maybe not aware of what fulfilment is.
I don't think they understand it as much.
No, that's their sort of emotional stage of life. So, enjoyment is a massive part before fulfilment has ever been introduced to them.
Yeah, my argument would be that even though they don't understand the words, fulfillment for them is about meeting their needs. So somebody feels fulfilled if their needs have been met.
So you don't have enjoyment as an aim of your session, but by providing a session that has all the good points that you want to provide, you would hope that enjoyment will come under that fulfillment idea.
Correct.
It's not a theme that you're like, well, they have to enjoy this session, but by putting on a good session, they will get something positive from it.
Yes. The consequence of pursuing fulfillment is that some people will enjoy that as well.
Can I add to that? When we are coached by the RFU, going to RFU coaches, enjoyment is one of the things they plug all the time with us. So you look at influence that to come back.
It's just his.
Yeah, I know, but it's a debate we had.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we nearly we bid for a lot of money a couple of years ago to explore the idea of what fun is. We're not very good at defining what it is. And what we were going to do was to compare sport like this with circus skills, because circus skills are fun, like juggling and stuff. Oh yeah. And that highlights beautifully the point that I'm making about fun, that how people define it is different, and trying to focus all my attention on doing that means that most sessions I'm going to walk away going, 30% of my players didn't enjoy tonight. Whereas I think I would walk away more often feeling like I had fulfilled people's needs. So it's a process of me getting better feedback from myself and challenging myself to do more than just be fun. Behaviour change, you'll tell me about that, so I don't need to ask about it because you'll fill in the forms. I hope we've collaborated. I think you've made some fantastic contributions. This wouldn't have worked in the way that it has, whether you think that was good or bad, if it wasn't for your contributions. If you think it was bad, it's partly your fault. I think you probably thought about ways to collaborate with people. Is nobody going to challenge the fact that I'm telling you what the feedback is?
I was just saying that one of the things I'm taking away is the training lead and the feedback lead. That's it.
Good.
That's worked really well for us.
Certainly.
That's a really cool take.
Yeah.
We've seen it certainly was at camp. We've got 6 coaches, and we're probably all looking at the same thing. So we don't actually set some parameters for our 9 coaches.
Just on that as well, me and Jimmy have had some discussions around those one-to-ones that we actually have started to think about players who are difficult to coach. We know you will have players in your group who you know are tough to coach. They stand on the wing all the time, or they don't say anything in discussions, or you have to actively go and speak to them. They won't ever come to you. So that co-coaching, and when we have the resources to do it, we're now starting to think, right, who are those players that are difficult to coach, and how can we still support them as well as the other guys that are easy to coach? So that might be, right, Aidan, you're going to observe, Jimmy's going to lead, Aidan, you're going to observe and feedback. However, you're also going to go and speak to 10 players and try and pick out the ones that are difficult to coach, or you find difficult to coach. So there's a little challenge within your role. You're feeding back, but also you're having some one-to-one moments.
Yeah, we often challenge. One of the ways that I coach Aidan and Jimmy is just to challenge them. And often we do that in a competitive way as well, because that's one of the things that fulfills them, because of their competitive natures, is let's see who can get the most ninja coaching one-on-ones tonight. And it's interesting that you are a nicer guy than Jimmy is, because he will actively try and sabotage Aidan's, whereas Aidan just tries to win at being the best one at doing that. So it's quite interesting how they'll do that. Have we learned anything about how to engage our players?
What examples have you got of ways so some stretch? That's
3 seconds.
Sorry?
When you've asked a question, and immediately didn't feel like wait that 1, 2, 3.
That's what I was actually trying to demonstrate that before you jumped in. But
sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, more than increasing one-to-ones, for less help. But then obviously do that as coaches might be
There are contextual differences between sports, but in my opinion, good coaching is just good coaching. And one of the professors that I had when I was doing my master's degree, who'd coached to a very high level in football, reckoned that he could pretty much coach any sport because he was just a really good coach. And that actually, because the emphasis that he placed on the way of coaching was a lot of the stuff that we've talked about here, and it was about drawing information out of them and collaborating, and you can do that anywhere. There's a lot of technical stuff, and I would say one of the things I've learned about this environment is that if I was ever to try and work here, I would need to learn a lot more about rugby. And I've been coaching it for 15 years, but I don't know rugby as well as these guys. So that's one of the things I'm learning about, is how to notice stuff, because they're telling me things about what they see, and I'm thinking, oh yeah, why didn't I think about looking at that? So that's really useful. How many times we've already had one suggestion, so 11 it was earlier on, wasn't it? 13, any higher or lower? Bruce's price is right? And that's not because I was necessarily deliberately trying to do it. I actually wrote the presentation, started to notice that that's what was happening. And what that tells me is not that we've presented well, but that cards is obviously quite fundamental to doing some of these good coaching practices, or practices that you might want to explore and experiment with, and it promotes them. Suggests that there's been some good thinking gone into why cards might be a good way to approach coaching.
Sorry. So we would, in the academy, and we've done, some guys have already been to CPD, in the rugby world at the moment, there are some higher order skills which we would just coach the kids, and they stand for creativity, awareness, resilience, decision making and self-organisation. And we would just believe as an academy, and what the RFU are also starting to push, is that those skills create incredibly skillful, adaptable problem solvers, and that's what we want in the game. Great question. But yeah, that's what it stands for. And if you write down your email just on the sheet, put an answer.
Yeah, so I've got it over there.
Right, yeah, I'll send you awesome stuff on it. Answer the other
That's the answer to your question. So it's just further reading. So if you want to know more about I don't know, game sense and how that links to questioning, read that stuff. If you can't get access to it, email me and I'll try and get hold of stuff and send it out. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Saracens, they have a philosophy club, their players. Some environments have started to do journal clubs. If you want to start that, I'd be all over that, I'd be happy with that. I'd quite happily facilitate that if you want to read stuff. I get that sometimes academic language is quite challenging, but if you want to get into some of that stuff, I'd be up for that. So the thing that I would finish on, and I don't want an answer because I'd like to hear about it later on, is if I was to ask you in 6 months' time what proportion of your session planning is spent thinking about you and your behaviour, what proportion would you like it to be? Don't answer the question, but just a bit of feedback. So at the back of the room, on the tables, with some free Northumbria University pens, which is very lucky, or there were some, it would really be great for us if you could fill out a feedback sheet, and if you would like the copy of the presentation, please leave your email address on there and I'll send you a copy of that out. It would really help us out if you would provide that, because it's really valuable for us to be able to know whether this is good and how it could be better. And Aidan's already identified that it could have been better, so I feel deflated. And I know it could always be better. Any questions, clarifications or comments?
When we do football ones, they tend to be, they're called coach to coach, and they tend to go more into technical stuff on how the game's played, whereas I don't think anyone really needs that. I think this is the kind of...
I'll grab you a little bit, just from, I met someone from Premier League the other day and they were interested in more. Just from me, a massive thanks to Ed for coming in and doing this. I certainly couldn't have delivered this as well as Ed could, so you've received the best in my opinion, so just a huge thanks to Ed. I really appreciate it. Taking your time out. Stuff for you guys, just a few things. So yeah, please do the feedback. It's really important, as you found out. The second thing is I'm sure, I know a lot of you are aware, however we do have a Newcastle Falcons YouTube channel which has some more rugby stuff in there, of not how skills, these will be how skills, but just what skills, so what games you can do and stuff. That's just there for you. You don't have to, it's just for everyone, just take it. It's, I think, pretty sure it's Academy Newcastle Falcons, or one way around, but you'll find it on YouTube. We do some YouTube live sessions. There will be ones coming up soon where you'll get a notice period of the YouTube live session coming up, and you can sit at home and just see better Jimmy, but also me coach, and again you'll see some of these house skills. There are some more CPD events to come which are more rugby specific if you're interested. So there is backline attack to come. And there's some other ones in other areas. There are some ones in Cumbria. Well done, mate.
Yeah. Fair effort.
If there's anybody else representing Cumbria, let me know. But yeah, we are going to do some more CPD events around Northumberland, Durham and Cumbria. Academy training. It is open to all of you, even footballers. Come and watch, come and get involved. Okay, it is open access. So if you are curious, we train on Monday and Thursday nights, 6:30 to 9. We have primarily 1 or 2 age groups, depending on the night. Yeah, just come and watch and ask questions, and it'd be great to get some feedback. You now know potentially what group coaching might look like, so just come and hang out. We'd love to see you there. And then the last one is how many in the room are part of the Magic Academy, which is on Edufy?
Russell said he was going to do it, didn't he? Sorry, Russell said after the last one he was going to do it, and the email addresses, but I don't know if anything actually happened.
No problem, I'll send you your email address. What if you could do is if you could just put in the top right hand corner of your sheet, just Magic, if you would like to be added to the Magic Academy. What it is a national program, national online resource portal where coaches just share. We're very well, Russell Earnshaw, who's one of the England 18s coaches, he's very aware that coaching can be quite isolated. You can feel, a little bit, we've got loads of people to organise and parents and whatnot. However, you guys are actually, there's thousands of you all over the country, and you have some great ideas. You have some great stuff going on. And there's Eddie O'Sullivan's on it. Eddie Jones is on it. He doesn't post anything, and I doubt he even looks at it. But there's coaches from the top down. So Dave Walder, our first team head coach, is on it, and he watches it. He engages in it. It's yeah, it's multi-sport, and it's just good stuff on there that you could steal for your environment and take it into your own context. And feel free to post. If you do want to get involved, physically get involved, and just it gives you an opportunity to share and learn some stuff. So put Magic at the top of your sheet. But other than that, guys, we have run over. I apologise, but I think it has been a great evening, and I really, really appreciate you coming out and just getting there. You just have such an impact now on the players. That's the most important.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Feedback sheet for the